So I've just got a message on my screen. Does that mean the live stream's working?
Yes, it appears. Yeah, it says live in the top corner. So yeah, we'll be on YouTube.
Super. So we can start then. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for everybody for joining us. Thank you for your patience. Apologies for the late start. We've had a number of technical hitches, but all seems to be okay now. So my name's Councillor Katie Dye. I will be chairing today's meeting. At this point, I would like to clarify that whilst the meeting is being webcast to enable public access, it is not being held as a public meeting in accordance with the Local Government Act 1972. As such, it is a remote consultative meeting of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. The consultative status of today's meeting means that some of the usual formalities will not take place at the start of the meeting. This also means that the committee will not be in a position to take any formal decisions, and any proposed actions that do require formal ratification will be referred to the next formal public meeting of the committee for approval. Please can I remind members to turn their microphone to mute when they are not speaking and use the hand raising function to indicate that they would like to speak as we move through the agenda. And if it's possible, members, can you keep your cameras on, please? Because I think that makes for a better meeting. I do understand that it isn't always possible. Okay, so can we start by members introducing themselves, please? We'll start with Councillor Anderson.
Morning, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adland Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Bowden.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Bowden, Roundhay Ward, and apologies, my camera isn't on. You can probably hear it in my voice, but I'm currently really unwell. Not COVID, but do stay diligent because it's a really horrible flu at the moment that's going around.
Thank you, and thank you for making the effort to join us, even though you're not well. That's commendable. Councillor Carlisle.
Hello, good morning. Councillor Peter Carlisle, Cavally and Farsley Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Carlisle.
Morning all, Councillor Ed Carlisle, representing Hunslet and Riverside.
Thank you. Councillor Downs.
Councillor Rick Downs, Otley and Eden Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Hanan.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor for Headingley High Park.
Thank you. Councillor Harrington.
Good morning, everybody. Norma Harrington, Wetherby Ward. I may have to dip out and I'll turn my camera off because I have BT OpenReach here at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Councillor Andy Rowntree from Kirkstall. I'm here today as a substitute for Councillor Adrian McCluskey.
Thank you, and thank you for giving up your time to join us. Is Councillor Newton with us? Don't think so. Councillor Rafiq?
Thank you, Chair. Mohammed Rafiq, Chapel Alton Ward, and I'm also the Exec Board Member for Climate, Energy, Environment and Green Spaces.
Thank you. Councillor Shazad?
Good morning, Chair. Councillor Mohammed Shazad from the Moortown and Ringwood Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson from Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Tudor?
Good morning, Councillor John Tudor, Councillor for the Bahamas. Sorry, I mean Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Thank you. And that is a genuine picture of Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward behind you. So just in case anybody's in any doubt. Okay, thank you. So now, officers, can you introduce yourselves, please? We'll start with Polly.
Good morning. Polly Kirk, Chief Officer for Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Thank you. And Chad?
Morning, everyone. Chad Newton, Senior Policy and Communications Officer for Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Thank you. Rachel?
Morning, all. Rachel Wainwright, Policy Officer for Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Morning, Rachel. George?
Morning, everyone. Senior Project Manager in the same team as everyone else.
Thank you, George. Toby?
Morning, Toby Russell, Clerk in today's committee.
Thank you. And Helen?
Good morning, everyone. Helen Gray, one of the clerks to the panel as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And James?
Morning, everybody. James Rodgers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Thank you. And Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Foster. I'm Transport Strategy Manager.
Thank you. And is there anybody I've missed? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Moving on to the agenda, can I ask you, Toby, to run through the formalities, please?
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, agenda item number 1, apologies have been received from Councillor Foster and Councillor McCluskey, and we have Councillor Roundtree substituted for Councillor McCluskey. And then I believe we're also just waiting for Councillor Newton, so I'll keep my eye for him. And under agenda item number 2, can I ask members to declare any interests? No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So that moves us on to the notes from the last meeting. So I'm going to, as always, go through them page by page and ask if anybody has any matters that they need correcting or matters arising they'd like to raise. So we'll start with page 5. Page 6. Page 7. So I've got one item on page 7. If you look kind of 2/3 of the way down, one of the proposals was that letters that get sent out could be used to engage with residents on climate initiatives. And I just wanted to raise that following that point, Chad did ask if it was possible for information to go out with the council tax bills this year, and was informed that it was too late, but has asked for next year, which I think is probably the earliest request that anybody has received for this year, for next year. So thank you for that, Chad. Is there anything you wanted to add on that? No? Okay, super. Thank you, appreciate that. Page 8. Page 9. And finally, page 10. Okay, so we're happy to approve those. So thank you very much for that. So that moves us on to item number 4. So item number 4 is open forum. We don't have anybody for open forum for this meeting, but we are working on a couple for next meeting. So hopefully they will be able to join us. But as always, if anybody has any residents or climate groups or anybody who would like to come and talk to us, please can you just remind them that they are very welcome to do so. Okay, so that moves us on to item number 5, and that is our director's update. And this meeting, James is here to join us from Communities, Housing and Environment. So over to you, James.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dye, much appreciated. I'm going to be ably assisted by Rachel, who's going to share a presentation which I'll run you through for this year's update. It should take me about 10 minutes, I would guess. Got about a dozen slides, and then what I'll do at the end is I'll then pause for any particular questions or any comments that people want to make. So if you go on to the first slide, please, Rachel. Okay, thank you. So this is just a reminder of what we do across the Communities, Housing and Environment Directorate, very much a public-facing set of services. So we've got clearly Climate, Energy and Green Spaces team, which you'll be very familiar with. We've got environmental services, including refuse collection, household waste sites and street cleansing. Management of the city's social housing stock, our Safe Strong Communities team, all the work that we do around community hubs and libraries, and our welfare and benefits service, and then our elections and regulatory team, which includes environmental health as well. And what I'll do is I'll run you through each of those teams and the sort of key highlights, headlines, since I last came just over a year ago. So next slide, please, Rachel. So I'll start with climate, energy and green spaces, and some specific issues there and achievements. So as members will probably be aware, in November 2023, Leeds City Council was awarded an A grade for climate action by the Carbon Disclosure Project, and that was the second year running that we've achieved that grade A, which is a fantastic achievement. There's 119 cities overall that achieved grade A, and Leeds was in the top 13 of those graded A, so we're feeling particularly proud of that as well. At the forefront of the work that we're doing to put decarbonisation infrastructure in place across the city is the Leeds Pipe district heating network, and that's continued to see expansion over the course of the last 12 months, and we'll continue to see further expansion in the next 12 months. And there's a report going to next month's executive board on that. Decarbonisation schemes have been developed across a range of council buildings, whether they be leisure centres, schools, or heritage buildings, so cover the support provided to other service areas, buildings within the city. And then last year saw the launch of the Leeds food strategy, which we did in partnership, and that supports the consumption and disposal of food across the city in line with the Climate Action Plan. There's a bit more on the Green Spaces team on the next slide, Rachel, please. So this is more on the green spaces side of things. So as members will be very familiar with, so the woodland creation, planting trees and woodlands, including the Trees to the Streets work that we're doing. We've taken forward a number of severe weather adaptations this year, including wildfire management, additional tree canopy within parks and surface drainage works. We've now got 128 urban bus hotspots within the city, plus wildflower displays, insect hotels, which are encouraging insects to pollinate plants, etc. And overall, there's 200 hectares of land that have been improved for pollinators. And then, again, as members will be aware, more relaxed mowing across the city, particularly on roadside verges. They've been extended this year, thus helping to reduce further carbon emissions. That's a summary of the Energy, Climate and Green Spaces team. Next slide, please, Rachel. Moving on to housing. So we launched the new housing strategy just over a year ago. A key part of that is improving energy efficiency within our social housing stock. We're in the process of delivering over the course of the period 2020 to 2025, £100 million worth of investment in renewable heating and energy efficiency projects in our social housing stock. And we've also published, I think it was March last year, the Net Zero Housing Plan, which creates a framework for achieving net zero looking forward. So lots of work in housing. I think the next slide is a bit more on housing. So that references there to the 15 million that we've received in respect to the upgrade grant. That's seen as improving the fabric and heating systems in 750 low-income private homes. We've also got 200,000 from the Green Home Finance Accelerator to develop and pilot new financial incentives for middle-income households to actually take forward a retrofit scheme. We've created a partnership with the Lloyds Banking Group and Octopus Energy, which is doing research and finding ways for, again, middle-income households to coordinate and undertake retrofit. We're a part of the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership, and that's successfully bid 14.7 million of social housing decarbonisation funds to support a range of works in homes owned by the different members of that consortia. And then we've got 59 high-rise blocks in the city, which have now had renewable heating installed as part of Leeds Pipes, and also ground source heat pump projects as well, and lots more to follow. And then on the right of that slide, you've got two more examples there of projects that we've done in the Boggart Hill part of Leeds, and also work that's underway in the Holt Vales. So lots going on in terms of housing. Next slide, please, Rachel. Safe, Stronger Communities team. Nature of that team, obviously supporting community committees, so doing work to support the creation of pocket parks in appropriate areas across the city, promoting using hanging baskets and such things, planting additional trees, working with in bloom groups and friends of groups throughout the city to create areas of great natural biodiversity and also improve air quality. And the buildings that we've got within this particular team, in essence, the community centres, taking forward, wherever possible, energy efficiency work within those particular buildings. Thanks, Rachel. Next one. Onto elections and regulatory services. So this includes a number of regulatory functions. So in pest control, doing a work to campaign for responsible rodenticide use, focus on housekeeping measures, monitoring and repairing, poison sprays and baits to be only used when absolutely necessary. In terms of electric vehicles, we've done a lot of work over recent years in taxi and private hire licensing to support the move to electric vehicles, and also by permitting electric vehicles to be licensed until 12 years of age, which is a positive development, installing more charging points across the city, and all our pest control vehicles are now electric within that particular service. There's also been a focus on reducing travel, and I'll come to this at the end as well, just to summarise across the whole directorate of work that we've been doing here. So registrars now hold appointments at hub sites across the city to avoid residents having to travel to the city centre, so thus reducing its environmental impact. And in elections, we've now got 50,000 less people now travelling to polling stations on election day, principally related to the number of people who are now doing their voting by postal votes, which is one of the largest in the country. And then also we've removed the use of portable buildings and generators in our polling stations, which again is making a contribution. Next slide, please, Rachel. And then environmental services, they've reduced their grey fleet mileage by 26%. And when I say grey fleet, so that's people using their own cars for work and claiming mileage. So that's seen just over a quarter reduction in the course of last year. Of all the household waste that we collect, whether it's from the black bin, the green bin, the garden bin, our waste recycling site, litter bins and bulky collections, only 0.29% of that actually now ends up in landfill, which is a significant achievement and one of the best performing in the country in terms of avoidance of landfill disposal. Members will have no doubt experienced, I hope, Newmarket House, which is a significant facility, which has significantly reduced the carbon footprint that we have within environmental services, which is a real positive. We're currently developing a new waste strategy, which will sit alongside the review of the waste collection routes, which will be coming online over the course of the next month or so. And clearly the RERF continues to help significantly in terms of supporting the Leeds Pipe scheme. Next slide, please, Rachel. And then community hubs and welfare. So I'll split this into two. So we've got the community hub development programme. So this is sort of investment work that we continue to make within our community hubs and libraries across the city. So whenever we do those, we look at wherever possible implementing energy saving measures, working with the decarbonisation unit. Our contractors have switched to electric vehicles. We make sure that timber used in construction is sourced from FSC approved suppliers. All our waste that comes from constructions is sorted to maximise recycling. Furniture is reused and reupholstered wherever possible. The hubs are now incorporated in terms of the council's broader building management system, which enables their energy uses to be monitored and thereby better managed, and LED lighting being installed in many of our buildings to cut energy use. And then from a general service provision within community hubs and welfare services, so we support residents to access services online, seeking to reduce paper and unnecessary journeys. Also looking at opportunities to work with other Leeds City Council or partner services where possible to provide more services from those buildings and therefore reduce journeys. We make sure that hubs are located to local communities to make sure they're accessible by bus, by foot, or by bike, and have bike racks at them as well. We've got heat wave checklists now in place, bear in mind some of the hot summer months that we have. We've taken a proactive approach preparing for severe weather. I'm going to come to that as well on the next slide. And again, business mileage is reduced, which again, I got a slide right at the end just to cover that. Next slide, please, Rachel. As members have seen, in terms of the sort of adverse weather that we're now increasingly getting, so we've taken forward a number of adaptations across the directorate, particularly in terms of dealing with the heat wave, so flexible working hours, particularly avoiding the hottest part of the day wherever possible, home working or alternative locations wherever possible, provision of sunscreen and cold water for staff who are working outdoors in extreme temperatures, regular breaks, as you would expect, workplace temperature monitoring, use of air conditioning, and welfare checks, particularly for our vulnerable staff who might get caught in terms of significant weather events. And then I think it's my last slide. So there's been a bit of focus across the council in terms of reducing business mileage claims. So I just thought it'd be useful just to report 5 service areas that we've got there, the reduction. So we've seen a 34% reduction across customer access, welfare and business support team, 26%, I've already mentioned, environmental services, 23% reduction in elections and regulatory services, 11% in safer, stronger communities, and 9% reduction in housing. The only one that's not on there is the climate, energy and green spaces team, and that's because of the directorate changes that took place a year ago. It's not been straightforward just to do the comparisons in terms of this year against last year, but overall members will see a fairly sizable reduction there in terms of mileage reductions that we've had. So I think that's it. I don't think there's any more slides there, so Rachel, just want to end the presentation. Hopefully that gives members a good flavour of all of the work that's been done on this agenda over the course of the last 12 months, and happy to take any questions or listen to any comments that members have.
Thank you for that, James. And it's good to see that since you last spoke to us that there's continued to be progress. That's really impressive, and really good to see climate adaptation moving up the agenda there. Can you put your electronic hand up, please, members, if you have a question or a comment you'd like to make? Thank you. Let's start with Councillor Carlisle, and then we'll have Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for the presentation. Just just one question for me, and it was just about thinking about the all the many people who go through the hubs and other, I suppose, public venues that the council run, but particularly hubs. I suppose, I mean, it's not just a question for you. I think it's a question for all of us. It'd be interesting to think how we can how we can kind of use that footfall to try to get messaging out around steps that people can take to play their part in I suppose as a city tackling climate change. So so it's brilliant everything that the council as an institution is doing on climate action, but how can we maximise our communications to try to get the wider city community engaged in climate action?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask James to come in and respond to points as people make them. But if any other officers would like at any point to come in on a particular question, then please pop your hand up and I'll bring you in as well. So we'll start with James.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I think Councillor Carlisle raised a very good point. I think quite clearly, particularly in community hubs, but probably in a range of other service areas, we have a captive audience, don't we? And a real opportunity, I think, to promote the work that we do, but also what more they could do as residents in the city to contribute to our sort of zero carbon ambitions and vision for the future. And I think what we should probably do is take away a piece of work and just think, what more could we do to actually do more of that? Because I'm not sure proactively, unless Chad, from a communications perspective, is aware of anything that we've particularly done in this area specifically. I'm not aware of any particular action, but we certainly could build upon that.
Can I come in, Chair? Sorry.
Yes, please do.
Thanks, Chair. just to come up on that, as my name was mentioned, we do regularly kind of use the community hubs to promote particular schemes. So, for example, we've got our funded energy efficiency measure scheme at the moment, and community hubs and having posters and leaflets, and promoting that scheme by the community hub is part of the action plan. It hasn't been actioned just yet, but it is on there, and we quite regularly do that for different schemes where they become available. I think what maybe Councillor Carlisle's suggestion was more about kind of the general engagement of kind of in terms of what individuals can do. We kind of have done that before. I think the barrier to that is always just kind of having the resource in order to have some of those conversations. But where it is just kind of having a poster or a leaflet up somewhere, we have tried that in the past. The one point I would also make, and this is more of a kind of from a policy point of view, is often the people that will be coming into the community hubs, particularly in if the types of people that will be coming probably don't have the greatest carbon footprint. So there is a kind of limit, I suppose, on and a question of are they the person to target with just general what can people do to reduce their carbon footprint kind of advice. But that isn't to say that we shouldn't be having any conversation with them, but I think that's also worth pointing out.
Thank you for adding that, and I see that Councillor Carlisle's put in the chat, communicating to people about the CDP report and good news stories, and I think looking at ways to do that are really good as well. I mean, certainly our hub gets a footfall for the hub, but there's also a library, there's a post office in there, and so there are a lot of people, and as Councillor Carlisle put in the chat, captive audience if people are standing in queues for things, and it's a good idea for them to be reading some good climate news stories whilst they wait. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Anderson.
This is about housing. I presume Leeds Building Services don't do this, so it's probably targeted more at mayors. What levers do you have to get them to improve their carbon footprint by the number of repeat journeys they make to people's houses? So in other words, if they got it right first time, their carbon footprint, what levers do you have? I accept that Jez Tinsdale's not here, so it's maybe slightly unfair to put James in the spotlight, but what can be done to try and get external companies like mayors in the housing side to get it right first time and reduce their carbon footprint?
Thank you. Do you want to come in on that, James?
Yeah, by all means. I think the main lead, Councillor Anderson, is using whatever contractual provisions that we've got in place. And I don't know the detail of the contract, so I can't specifically say what we've got in there. But what I would say is clearly, as we renew contracts, it gives us an opportunity to put stronger requirements in around this particular agenda. I can get more detail from Jez what might be in there for you at the minute, if that would be helpful. But that's the way I would propose we deal with it looking forward.
Yeah, I'm not being critical. I'm just asking the question, actually.
So it's a fair question and a fair comment.
Thank you, and I do think that is a fair point. I would imagine all the members on the call here will have plenty of casework from people where that several visits have been made to a property, and from their point of view, it's frustrating. But from a climate point of view, absolutely right. The less journeys, the better. So thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Downs.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. One is on the buzz. And the sort of where we're greening areas. Is there a map or an available somewhere where we can see where in the city that is? Is it concentrated in certain areas around parks, or is it and is it something that is continuing and can be fed into in communities if there isn't enough in that area and we can get more? And then the second question is on the recycling and the there was a statistic there which says it's now down to 0.29%, which goes to which is basically buried. Is that, am I understanding that right? It's just 0.29% of Leeds waste isn't reused or used for heating or anything. Is that the actual figure, and just out of interest, what's that 0.29 made of?
Thank you. Do you want to come in on those two, James?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do the last one first, and maybe I'll ask Polly to come in on the second one. She might have a bit more detail on the buzz and what's available in terms of the maps, etc. Yeah, so in terms of that 0.29% that I refer to, you are correct. That's the amount that actually goes to landfill. Effectively, that will be, and it will mainly come, I suspect, that waste that ends up in our household waste sites that we can't dispose of through any of our recycling contract arrangements and cannot be disposed of via the RRF. And it'll be particular material that can't go through those particular methods. But yeah, no, 0.29%. When you actually look at our recycling percentage, you will see that isn't, for example, the opposite of the 0.29%, i.e. 99 point whatever percentage. My maths are failing me at the minute. And the reason for that is because we can't count effectively as a recycling target all of the waste that goes to the RRF, despite it producing the energy that it produces, and despite all of the ash that comes out of the RRF being recycled. And that's to do with sort of national definitions of waste. And if we could actually define that as recyclable waste, then our recycling rate would be up to 99.71% to balance that out. Hopefully that helps Councillor Downton. I don't know, Polly, do you know the detail on the bus one?
So just generally about greening the city, I missed a bit about the bus. Do you mean, is that the bus stops you were referring to, Councillor Downs?
That sort of wildflowers like that.
Yeah.
What area? Is there a map to show where it is, or is it possible that can it be added to?
Yeah, so I don't think we have an overall map of everything, and it's a changing position. But we have a number of different schemes that are happening at the moment. So we have the Trees for Streets, where individual residents can choose to plant trees outside their houses. We've got some of the biodiversity net gain schemes where we'll see changes to the way different parts of our green space is used to improve the biodiversity. Each of the schemes will be consulted on, so there'll be a chance for people to see what's being proposed in their local areas. And the same with the woodland creation, we do a sort of annual consultation on where different schemes are proposed. As yet, we haven't got a map of everything that's happening across the city. I think it would be nice to have. I think the trouble will always be resource and how quickly the picture's changing. But if, in your certain area or whatever, we're more than happy to engage and talk about the things that are planned with a community committee, or if that's something that's of interest.
Thank you. Just picking up on that, one of the questions that I put on my list was the thing you mentioned, James, about urban buzz hotspots, which isn't something I've heard of, and I would imagine quite a lot of residents will be quite interested in that. I know I certainly get a lot of correspondence about improving pollination corridors and things like that. So I think it would be quite nice for us to have a bit more information on exactly what the buzz hotspots are and where they are, unless I'm the only one on the call that is in the dark about that.
I suspect you're not, Councillor Dyke. I think it's probably a piece of work initiative that the service has got on with and developed and give it a bit of a brand, but we've probably not really promoted that more widely. So that is something I think we can take away and certainly do.
Thank you. And I see that Councillor Bowden's put in the chat a suggestion that anybody who hasn't visited the RRF to do so, because it is super impressive, and I would most definitely agree with that. I know periodically we have had visits arranged for councillors to go around it, and I don't know whether there's anything planned in the near future, but if you've not been, I do suggest you go. Thank you for that, everybody. Okay, so Councillor Tudor.
Hi. Yeah, that is amazing. That it's a shame that can't be the burnt waste at the RURF can't be included in recycling figures, because not only is it ash and heating, but of course electricity that brings in money as well. And so that 99% sounds energy. That's not what I wanted to say. I just wanted to go back to I think I heard pest control vehicles going electric. I thought some or all of the pest control was outsourced. So perhaps again, more a question for Jez Tinsdale, perhaps. But is all pest control in house then?
We brought it back in house, Councillor Tudor, last year.
Right.
So it is now all back in house. Yes.
And then just to finish, the idea of repeat visits to places and to look across the service at things like, for example, when tenants lose their keys, what is the process there? Do vehicle journeys get made to take keys to tenants? Is there any charge for that sort of thing in terms of decarbonisation?
Thank you. Do you want to come in on those, James?
Yeah, no, thank you. And not the first point. In terms of the second one, I don't know actually, in terms of the detail of what happens in terms of losing the keys and what the process is. I suspect they will need to get the keys to the resident pretty quick. So we'd either have to them collecting them from somewhere or us delivering them. So I can find out, but I don't know specifically, Councillor Tudor.
I bring it up because I think in some other meeting I went to just before Christmas, there was the quite like staggering figure for the cost of reissuing keys to tenants across the city.
Okay, I'll take that one away and ask more questions myself.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions, Councillor Tudor. Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Briefly, just on Councillor Bowden's suggestion about if anybody hasn't visited the RURF, we've got actually a couple of inductions for new members and tour of the RURF planned. It's very short notice. The next one is actually tomorrow afternoon, Tuesday, at 4 p.m. The tour of the RURF, and there should be another session as well in the next few weeks. So I know it's a very short notice, but if anybody could go at 4 o'clock, they should be able to join. Just drop me or John Wilmer a line, and we'll make sure you include it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Okay, so looking at my list, I had one on the buzz hotspots, which Councillor Downs asked. And one on the business mileage, James, you mentioned some reductions and shared some numbers with us. It was just a wondering about how easy has that been and what's the potential for further improvements?
I think there's always potential for further improvement. I couldn't tell you now in terms of what the scope of that actually is without doing some more detailed analysis. I think the figures overall of a reduction over the course of the year have been pretty good actually when you look at some of those percentage reductions. So I suspect any future reductions will be much smaller. But clearly the carbon, I think, driven agenda, but also the financial challenge that we've got as a local authority, I think coming together, there's two reasons why it's important to reduce mileage, a really positive thing. So I would hope to continue to see a reduction, although I'm not sure it'll be as significant in the second year. I think that it'll just level out a little bit, but continue to reduce.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one for me was about the energy use monitoring that you mentioned in hubs. I think that's a really important piece of work because clearly we can't address it without having a really clear idea of where we're at. So I just wondered where that was up to in terms of a piece of work.
I think it's a broader piece of work corporately in terms of obviously energy monitoring in our whole estate, which asset management and facilities management colleagues will be working on. Real positive development for us in terms of our community hubs, for example, because it does help monitor and In terms of where we are overall, in terms of the council and the number of buildings now covered, I couldn't answer that question, but colleagues in asset management or facilities management should be able to do that.
James, shall I come in?
If you've got some detail, that'd be helpful.
So it's actually the plan maintenance team that have been implementing it. So we've started with primarily the leisure centres and obviously the big civic estate. And what we're trying to do is where we can actually remote monitor energy usage. So it has been quite challenging to get it installed, and we're still improving as we go in terms of sensors and where it works and alerts and things. So I'd say we're in quite early days, but actually the change it can make in terms of how we understand our buildings and things like if there was a leak in a swimming pool, you'd spot it pretty much straight away, whereas previously that would have been more challenging. And it allows us to see how well some of the new technology is working, or when there are issues, people can diagnose remotely. So we've been working with LBS and facilities management as well, so that they have access to it. So it's a real step change, but I would say we are quite early on in that process, and we've got a lot of learning to go through, but it's a good step forward.
Thank you. I think it is. I think it's a really important piece of work. Do you see a day where all our buildings, including hubs and community centres, have that kind of technology?
So as part of the work with the community hubs, asset management have recognised how important it is. So when they're doing the community hub review, that will be built into it as part of any of the work that goes on, because I think without that we can't control what's happening in buildings, and you can't see when things are going wrong in buildings. So, and it's even, you know, like for example with a school, if a school's letting out their property at an evening, they don't understand actually how much that costs them in energy, if they're floodlights or anything like that. So similar for us, you've got to understand the energy consumption at different times to make sure you're actually recovering costs for whatever you're doing there during that period. So our aim would be to get it as far as we can. There's obviously a cost to it, so there's a cost benefit that will always be undertaken. So like a parks depot, for example, would never be worthwhile because the energy spend isn't high enough. But we'd like to get it down to across a lot more of our buildings than we currently have.
Brilliant, thank you. So before I sum up and close this item, any other comments from officers or councillors? Okay, so just looking at some takeaways that I've scribbled down. The idea of communications in hubs, Chad's shared with us work that is going on, but I think anything that we can do to carry on with our messaging, I think is really important with that. The issue of repeat visits with vehicles, I think that's probably a really important piece of work to look at. Councillor Rafiq shared the RERF site visits. I know you said there was another one coming up in the next few weeks. If you could share possibly the dates for that, that would be really helpful, because I think people might struggle. Some people might be able to make tomorrow, but it would be good if there's another one going on that you could share. Thank you. I see a thumbs up on that one. The buzz hotspots, a little bit more information for us on where they are would be really helpful, because we can then share that with residents. And the issue of lost keys, James, you were going to look in from both a financial and a climate point of view. So I think that's a summary of the main points we were asked to pick up on further pieces of work. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time, James. Thank you for attending, and you are free to go.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome. See you later.
Thank you. Okay, so that brings us on to item 6, working groups update. So we haven't had any working groups meeting in the time between the last full SEAC and this one, but I just wanted to remind you that we have biodiversity, food and waste on the 29th of January, economy and finance on the 30th, community and business engagement on the 5th of February, and planning and buildings on the 6th of February. So just encourage you all to make sure you're free to attend as many of those as you can. That would be super. Thank you very much. Anybody else got any comments they'd like to make on working groups? Okay, so that moves us on to item 7. If you remember, when we discussed the CDP A grade rating that we got, we said we wanted to bring the feedback to this committee so that we could use that to look at our forward planning for the committee for the next year, because we wanted to do our best to make sure that we're doing everything we can as a city to keep that grade. So I think Chad, you're going to present on that. So thank you, over to you.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. I've just got a very brief presentation to walk through some of the feedback. So please let me know when that is coming through. Can people see that?
Not yet, Chad.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay, just give it 1 moment, and I'll just briefly introduce this. So as you've correct, Chair, we found out back in December that Leeds received an A grade for the 2nd year running, and we knew that we were due to get feedback, but we hadn't received it at that point. We did actually receive the feedback.
I think Chad's frozen.
I was just about to say, we can see your screen now, Chad, but we can't hear you.
We're not having a good day technology-wise, are we?
We're not. No, we're not. I don't know if it's doing the two together that's caused a problem, and whether somebody else has Chad's screen to share or the presentation.
I think Chad's rejoined.
I'm back now. I apologise that I don't know what happened. My Zoom just crashed. I will try one more time, hopefully more successfully, to share my screen.
Thank you.
If it does it again, Chad, maybe
I'll send it to Rachel.
Yeah, I was going to say one of us could share.
Okay, I think you can see this now.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Hopefully I will be able to get to the end of the presentation before this. So I don't know how much you heard, but I was saying that as you mentioned, Chair, we found out in November that we received A grade for the 2nd year running, but we knew that we were going to receive some feedback, but we only got that at the start of a couple of weeks ago, basically, this bump. So this is an opportunity to share this as requested by the committee. I thought I'd also just include a reminder of some of the kind of the key facts around CDP. So it is a global non-profit. Lots of cities, regions, local governments across the world participate in it, so more than 1,000, and also tens of thousands of organisations representing a very large amount of global market capitalisation also disclosed as well. And then for us as a council, it helps provide a useful, independent and robust check on the city's climate action, which we feel is very complementary to the work that CX does. So, that's why sharing this feedback is really useful and hopefully informative for the future of the committee. And there was a question raised, which we have addressed in writing, but just to do so in public context as well, just to clarify that there is zero cost to the local authority for participating in CDP. We don't pay anything; they don't pay us anything. Essentially, the business model is the private sector are charged for their engagement. But for the public sector, it is free of charge as well. So as I've already mentioned, Leeds received an A grade, and the two charts on the screen show where that sits alongside kind of the European and the global average. So we got an A grade, whereas the regional average in Europe was a B, and then across the world it was a C. And just for info as well, in terms of further context, the slide that I'm showing currently shows all of the UK areas that got an A grade as well. So if it's not, if a place isn't on here, it means either they didn't submit to CDP, and not everywhere does, or they did but they didn't receive an A grade, and therefore their score isn't public. But you can see that we're among a number of kind of core cities, as well as others, with an A grade recognition this year, and obviously that's that's a club that we want to stay a part of going forwards. In terms of how the scoring works, I can provide a brief kind of overview of it here, but there is more information available online. If people are interested, then we can recirculate that link. But essentially, there is a 4-grade system, so starting at a D, and then you have to get a minimum threshold, meet minimum criteria in order to kind of move and progress up the scoring system. So we're obviously in the top right in the leadership, meaning that we have kind of achieved all of the criteria that are required for the lower grades. What that also means, and this is in a bit more detail, is that we tick all of the boxes kind of set out on this current slide, which was provided to us by CDP. So what sets out kind of the highest grades is having an integrated or separate plans for climate action and adaptation. And actually, over the last couple of years, the committee has focused on and heard a lot more about adaptation work, and that is something that sets the cities with the higher grades and lower grades apart, because it's not just around ending a district's contribution to climate change, but also about considering how to protect the city going forwards as well. And we also have to be fully transparent, and all the information in our submission is available on the CDP website, as well as we voluntarily publish it as part of an exec board report, and we'll continue to do so as well. The next couple of slides are really focusing on the feedback of the things that of how we get to the better scores. But I just want to just note that the reason we have an A is because we scored very, very well, and got lots of very good feedback for all of these areas. But obviously there are a few things and few areas where we may be able to get even more points going forwards. And I should actually note before progressing from this slide that the way that the scoring works is they essentially make it harder to achieve an A grade every single year in order to encourage further and further climate action. So just because we got an A grade in 2023 does not mean that we'll automatically get one for 2024. So we have to obviously keep communicating and disclosing what we're doing. And the feedback that we receive is a really good tool to kind of inform that work. So broadly speaking, this slide provides a summary of the feedback that we did get in terms of how we could get a better score as a city. The fact that I can fit it all in one slide in not too small a size text shows that there actually wasn't a huge amount left for us to do in order to score better. But I kind of grouped everything here into kind of 3 buckets essentially. There are some where essentially we just need to explain what we're doing already better. So for example, better explain the progress in terms of the flood alleviation scheme, the connecting leads work, and also better explain how we engage some of the different groups, including vulnerable people, on adaptation. And I would say that we have that information. We do that already. That is just a case of essentially when we do this submission next year, just making sure we're engaging with the right colleagues, so that we can explain that better in order to get those points essentially. Then there is kind of a second bucket of feedback, which is where actually we just need to get some new data. And so for example, we got asked around, do we have data at a district level to say, this is how people travel on a day-to-day basis. The data that we used was available kind of at regional level, or Yorkshire and Humber level, because we weren't aware of any district-wide level data at that stage. We have since had some conversations with transport colleagues and others more recently, which may suggest that actually we will be able to provide that data going forwards. And we have also seen the Connecting Leads annual report to Executive Board with published some new data since the CDP submission was sent off. So hopefully that's something we can tick for next year and get more points at next year as well. But similarly, what can we do to disclose more detailed metrics on kind of tree planting targets? We have data on hectares planted that we didn't include for whatever reason this year. So that is potentially one option. Or is there any way of refreshing the area tree canopy cover data as well? That's something worth exploring. And then finally is the kind of the bucket of feedback with suggestions of ways that we could improve where actually new policy development is required. So it isn't simply the case of just responding to the questionnaire in a more fulsome way. And so there are 3 points here. So firstly, can we publicly set an area-wide renewable energy generation target? It's our understanding that actually there is work being undertaken at a regional level that Leeds engage with and colleagues on the call are engaged with to develop a local area energy plan. And when that is completed and published, then hopefully that will actually do this very point in terms of talking about targets for renewable energy generation. So there is a plan in place, and hopefully we'll be able to cover that off in the not too distant future. The second point was around can we just set out more examples of different plans that once they're delivered will have the effect of reducing district-wide emissions. I think that links also to the renewable energy generation plan, which will have a significant carbon reduction once that is developed and once that's delivered. And there's possibly more that we need to do in order to kind of quantify some of the carbon impact of some of the really big kind of strategic level schemes that we have, and include that in the submission. And then the final point, and the really tricky question, is can we share how many carbon credits will be needed if Leeds to become fully net zero, because there will always be some degree of residual emissions left over, or at least there will be before you get to net zero. And in order to become fully net zero, then you need to either find some way of kind of offsetting those carbon emissions that you cannot reduce any further within a time frame, and we haven't set out any plans or targets on how that will be achieved just yet. And that's probably the trickiest point on this whole slide and the whole feedback, to be honest. So just finally, in terms of next steps, so the Climate, Energy and Green Spaces team will continue to kind of coordinate and lead the writing of the CDP submission going forwards. Obviously, we have to engage services at an early stage and get data from them, and we're very grateful for everyone that helps us out with that. As noted, we will engage particularly with the transport, flood alleviation and forestry teams to strengthen those sections where the feedback is required, whereas feedback has suggested that more information is required. And as I've also mentioned, we're going to explore new sources of data that we can share that will allow more transparency and accountability of the city's progress. And then finally on this slide, Chair, is one kind of suggestion for the committee and how the committee could support this work, potentially by considering issues such as tree planting progress, the local area energy planning development, and this issue of carbon credits as part of the some of the agenda items being looked at over the next municipal year could potentially help strengthen that policy development and allow us to include more in the CDP submission. And so last but not least is just some of the key dates to be aware of. So CDP will publish the 2024 questionnaire in April. We will then be able to start entering data into it from June, and it's our intention to complete that by September so that we can publish the final submission alongside the annual Exec Board report on the climate emergency, which is currently due for September as well. And we don't have any exact timelines of when that the 2024 feedback and score will be published, but it should be sometime in early 2025 is what we can say for now. So so with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Chad. A really comprehensive and very easy to understand summary of the situation. I just want to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to you, Rachel, and Polly, everybody else who's involved in pulling together that, because it is a huge piece of work, and thanks in advance for all the work that's coming with the next one. So I'm going to open it up for questions and comments, bearing in mind that what we're tasked with doing for this item is to look at using the feedback that Chad's shared with us to develop our forward plan. So with that in mind, let's go to Councillor Downs.
I think that might be me. My system's freezing up a bit at the moment. Just a very quick question. You said the report said we were in the top 13%. Is it published anywhere what the actual list is? Do we know where we are within England, for example, or Britain? You know, is that something we're aware of, or you just told your actual position and that's it?
We know, as I shared on the screen, that we know who gets an A grade in the UK. But what we don't find out is, I suppose, the exact relative position within the A grade cities. I'm not aware of anything. I know Rachel's on the call. I don't know if Rachel has seen anything like that, but I don't think that we do. I think you just find out whether you're an A grade or not, and then how many cities are in each grade, but not the relative positions within those particular grades. But if anyone knows otherwise, then feel free to jump in. And I also must apologise because I don't think you can see me, and I'm not sure why that is, because my video is on. But yeah, it's technical difficulty, so apologies. I'm not hiding or anything.
That's all right, Chad. You made it through the presentation, and we can hear you. Rachel, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I don't believe, similar to what Chad said, I don't believe there is anything that specifies exactly. I mean, we can have a good look through and see, because there's sort of different little windows of data that they hold on there. So it's definitely something we can see if it is. But I would be inclined to say similar to what Chad said there, where we do get told that particular data, but we don't actually get told at what point we sit. But I can definitely have a look. So I'm looking at other different data sets within it anyway, prior to our next submission, so I can have a look for Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Rachel. Anybody else got any questions on this item? I see that Councillor Bowden has shared a link with a map. Fabulous. So if anybody wants to look at more detail into that data, then please feel free to click on Councillor Bowden's link in the chat. Councillor Carlisle.
Thank you. Just a final point, really, for clarification. So I know a number of points, you noted that we could get the data, and we've got that. I assume, obviously, we need all of that that you'd included for the next rating up. The more difficult bits that you noted, how many carbon credits we'd need, etc. Do we think that's something that we're going to be able to work on and we're going to be able to do? I appreciate that's actually quite a complex job. Not all services will know how far we can get to, I don't think.
Can I come in on this one? So I don't think we would be able to for this submission, if I'm honest, but I think we could start to talk about the process that we will go through to get there, rather than necessarily having the conclusion for this time. I think that's probably a kind of realistic target for this year, but it will take a while to get to an actual target, I think, in terms of carbon credits.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, it's just also to add, I know that in previous discussions we did mention about speaking to other local authorities as well. So we're currently in the process of looking at the available data from the A list cities that obviously Chad shared And for some of these feedback elements already, we've been having a look at the different local authority and core cities, and it does seem at the moment it's a common theme across most of the other authorities in terms of a lot of these questions. In terms of the feedback that we've shared, such as the carbon credits, it would seem that we're trying to use other cities to see how they've responded to sort of effectively construct and see how we can move forward. But at the moment, it does seem on first glance that other cities are having similar challenges. So it's kind of reassuring. Although it might not be seen as that way, it's also reassuring to us that there's obviously something in terms of a wider challenge for most of these cities as well. But I do know that previously members did share that they'd like us to sort of speak to other cities and local authorities. So it's just to let people know as well that is something that we've been on with. But when it presents you with multi-million rows of data for Excel spreadsheets, amongst other things, it's not been the quickest venture at the moment, but that is ongoing as well.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm sure it's not, but we do appreciate it. Anybody else got any comments or questions? Okay, so I will go on to the things I wanted to say then, Chad, if that's okay. The first thing was that you mentioned that it's going to be harder to get an A grade. Is that because the actual criteria change? Or
yes, essentially, to put it in layman's terms, they make the goalpost smaller every year in order for an A grade to be worth more, essentially, recognizing that the closer, the longer that time goes on, that is more time that cities have to respond to the climate emergency, and the less time we have before we hit the Paris Agreement targets, essentially. So that is how it's designed. I should say is we had a call a couple of weeks ago with a representative of CDP to get our feedback, and while she couldn't give us the final details of what's going to change for the next year and say it's definitely going to be the same or in this section or this other section, I think we all left that meeting with a strong feeling like actually, our performance for the 2024 is relatively safe. But that just means that there's more time to prepare for whenever the next round of changes is. And we should, and also, obviously, this is the whole point of this is that we want to, do as much as possible. And this is a really useful tool to highlight, what other opportunities there are. And as Rachel says, also learn from what other cities, if there's any good ideas that other cities across the UK have been trying as well. So just because we feel relatively comfortable with the 2024 submission doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to, get as many points as possible by strengthening our own performance and our own submission.
Thank you, Chad. That's really good to hear. So other things that I was going to ask, the work learning from other councils. Thank you, Rachel. I don't need to ask that. You already answered that one. And then I think the rest of my points really were about us as a committee and our forward plan. So the things that you mentioned in your presentation, Chad, in terms of the data, tree planting, renewable energy, and so on, I think we really just need to look at when we're bringing these items to SEAC over the next period to specifically look at those asks from CDP, so that, if we're discussing tree planting or we're discussing flood alleviation or something like that, that we are very specific about examining that data that's wanted from us. So I think a lot of these things we have had at SEAC, haven't we? And we will continue to do so. In fact, we've got connecting leads coming up later today. So, I don't think there are any huge changes that we need to make to the things that we're planning on looking at. I think it's perhaps being a little bit more forensic about what we do in terms of examining those topics. Anybody else got any comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you for that, Chad. I for one, found that really helpful, particularly the slide about exactly what is going to be asked of us in terms of the coming year. And I will keep that as a little kind of post-it note of things that we need to be aware of as a committee. So I found that really helpful. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think just on those three fronts, and I know Gary's on later on the connected transport strategy, but, you know, apart from that, on flood alleviation and tree planting, I think in all these areas, and particularly, you know, flood alleviation and tree planting, we've actually doing really well. We're punching above our weight, and if you look at the phase 1 and phase 2, one of the biggest kind of schemes in the country they've been in the last few years, and equally the tree planting as well. So and then all the work that's going on with the transport. So I think there's a lot to be talked about and share, and we need to we could actually in terms of our future submissions, we could actually expand and to be proud of. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree, and I think we have an awful lot to be proud of. That's good to hear. And another thing as well is that we're going to be looking at what we're doing with the working groups as well. So, you know, there's some stuff that we can get our teeth into in those as well. So, okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Very much appreciated. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, going to be an ongoing theme really for the next year in terms of looking at those specific asks of us and making sure that we're on target with that. So super, thank you very much. So that moves us on to item 8, which is update on heat network zoning, and that is over to you, I think, George.
Thanks, Chair. I will share my screen, hopefully, and just try to deliver a presentation. So hopefully everyone can see that okay.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so my job today is to try and make a government consultation really exciting and engaging for all of you. So I will do my best to do that by just trying to link it through to what we're doing here in Leeds and how it can impact us both positively and potentially negatively. And then just to flag a few areas that I think we should respond to in the consultation, then throw it open for a general discussion. So as a bit of background to heat network zoning, essentially it's a new government policy which is contained within the Energy Act, which became an act in autumn last year. It's been trailed for a good long time now, probably a couple of years. We've been working quite closely with civil servants on the development of it, and overall, it's a very well thought through and well-meaning policy, which is basically designed to overcome some of the issues with district heating networks, in that it takes a huge amount of investment to get them off the ground, and there's very little certainty of connection. So what it aims to do is to make district heating go-to technology in areas where it should be cheaper to decarbonise buildings and heat pumps. And it does that by mandating that larger buildings and new developments will connect to district heating. So it gives that kind of element of certainty, which networks are currently missing. The way it's designed to be implemented is that local authorities or potentially regional authorities would become things called zoning coordinators, where they're tasked with establishing and enforcing zones and then liaising with the mandated buildings and heat sources. The These zoning coordinators are then required to competitively tender for heat network delivery bodies who will actually build the networks and connect the customers. And there is a consultation which is out now, closes end of February. And the intention is that the zoning policy will be live and for implementation from 2025. So in terms of the work that we've done today in Leeds, we've participated in heat network zoning pilot, which ran through a whole load of the methodology which is likely to be used to set zones. Very techie piece of work. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it ended up with the indication that all of the areas here in orange could be set as zones within Leeds. They all meet the criteria of district heating being cheaper than alternative sources of heating. We also took part in a piece of work called the Advanced Zoning Programme, which took this on to the next level of detail, where government are intending to work with local authorities, about 19 local authorities, to try to get zonal scale networks to the point of delivery in 2025, basically to help the policy get a flying start. And within this, we focused our effort on the central zone in Leeds. See on this slide here that the area in the middle of the slide is our existing Leeds pipes network with a bit of a standoff around it. And then in the bottom right is a potential area that SSE is planning to develop with heat from the new Infinium energy from waste plant. As part of our pilot work, we've done some work with Arup, which has looked at, what is the scale of this thing? What is the scale of zoning in Leeds? And just in this central zone here, they've identified that there's 650 gigawatt hours of mandatable buildings. And to put that into context, we currently supply about 30 gigawatt hours across the whole of the Leeds Pipes network. So we're talking about an order of magnitude larger with the zonal scale developments. In terms of other numbers, 175 kilometers of network, 650 million of capital investment is required to make this thing happen. So it's a very, very large undertaking. And I think we've already been through this. The focus on for Leeds, for the advanced zoning programme, is to focus on what does it mean with zoning in the city centre, South Bank and Aire Valley. But what we're really focusing about 80% of the consultants' time on is the South Bank. So the area shown in purple here, where we've applied for some green heat network funding to develop a network to known customers, so some of the developers in the area. What we're asking the consultants to look at is how would the zoning policy change what we intend to build. We anticipate that it's going to be about 3 times larger than what we've got planned to build in the area, to make sure that we provide enough capacity for all of the mandatable buildings in those areas. So coming on to the consultation itself, the policy sets out the consultation sets out quite clearly what the zoning coordinator's role is. And essentially it's to act as kind of a local regulator. So the zoning coordinator would establish each of the zones using some nationally provided data. It identifies heat providers within those zones, so things like data centers or large industrial waste heat sources. The zoning coordinator also decides how to procure each of the zones, so whether we'll split it up into subzones and procure those separately or try and do it as a single large zone. We would then, as a zoning coordinator, run a competition to secure delivery bodies. We then liaise with the locally mandated buildings and heat sources to get them warmed up to connecting. We also have an enforcement role where we enforce decisions that we take with potentially quite significant levels of penalties. So £40,000 for smaller organisations, up to £250,000 for larger organisations. And then we run appeals process internally with an escalation route. And then we can review zones if there are significant changes to either national policy or the way that the city is configured, then we can choose to review the zones. And the proposal is that zoning coordinators are initially funded centrally and provided with support by the central zoning authority. In terms of some of the key issues that we've identified around the zoning coordinators, we think that there are likely to be quite a lot of similarities to the planning function, where we have a planning authority that sits within Leeds City Council, but it's semi-autonomous to some of the decision making that we take as a city. We think, given the kind of independent nature of the role of zoning coordinators, it could sit quite nicely there. And there's clearly an overlap of functions where you're looking for new developments and that kind of intelligence. How do we engage with a large number of external bodies? So that's something that we need to look at as part of the consultation a bit more depth. We're concerned that the level of central funding is unclear, and there's also a proposal that delivery bodies should pay for at least a portion of this in future. We think that could potentially create conflicts of interest, but again, there's a parallel to through the planning process, planning applicants paying fees, which we then collect and use to fund the service. So I think it's something we just need to scrutinise and ask a few questions on. One of the obvious things is that this is a big new requirement for local authorities, particularly in the early days of establishing zones. So we think there is a need for funding certainty and forward funding to make sure that we've got the ability to create the capacity that we need to be able to fulfil this function. So we'll be pushing back to make sure that we are clear on the kind of the funding need that we think we have, and to make the case to have that funding upfront to build capacity. We also think that the governance for zoning coordinators is quite onerous. It's quite a clunky, centrally designed process. We think there's probably a better way of doing things that has a more local and more nuanced kind of local control over the governance. So we plan to just recommend streamlining that process. And one of the things that I'm most concerned about is that because we have a role to enforce penalties, and there is an appeals process for those that we enforce penalties against, it's currently unclear what the implications of appeals are and what the limit is for our liabilities there. If we are liable to pay for appeals that are upheld, that's a big risk that isn't currently funded, and we need to push back on that. Moving on to the next kind of big area that I want to flag with you is the impact on existing networks. So this is where it becomes very real for us as the developers and operators of Leeds pipes. Government has been talking to industry and district heating network operators, and they're very clear in the consultation that there is no intention that any existing network would be forced to sell up to a future delivery body then. So to avoid that need, they've created a proposal where they would create an incumbents rule. So heat networks that already operate in an area or have plans to operate in an area have certain rights and obligations, which allows them to kind of stand outside the zoning procurement, which is being anticipated. But what government has said is that outside of these areas, there is still an expectation that a zoning coordinator would procure for a delivery body to develop the rest of the zone. So if a existing network exists in a small part of a zone, then the expectation is that there would be a procurement outside that, and I'll come on to that in a bit more in a second. And also, if a local authority wants to be a delivery body, as we currently are with Leeds Pipes, then the proposal is that the zoning coordinator would be established as an entirely separate entity to the City Council. So just picking up on the slight inconsistency or the inoperability of the plan to have competitive procurement for areas outside zones. This map here shows our existing Leeds Pipes, what we anticipate we will build with the South Bank, and then the SSE zone here. So you can see that it leaves a very unattractive kind of donut around a central zone, where I cannot see any realistic way of procuring this as a number of separate smaller zones without access to the low carbon heat that we are going to be having in the other part of the zone. So we're going to push back quite heavily that where an existing zone renders the rest of the zone unviable or not commercially competitive, that it's better to see it as better to give the zoning coordinator the powers to designate that as a single zone. And then just coming on some of the other issues, we feel that setting up a zoning coordinator as an entirely separate body to the local authority is not really democratic. And we already have the planning authority within Leeds, which has that air of independence. So I think if we can locate the zoning coordinator within the planning authority, that gives us sufficient separation of duties. We currently determine planning applications that one part of the council submits via the planning authority. And this is a very similar sort of analogy to that. We can have independence within a local authority. I've just covered point 2, where we think there's essential to have that ability to make zones operational. And we also, there's a technical point around competition. So if a district heating contractor has already been appointed, reading the consultation, it seems to say that they would be subject to the Utilities Act, requiring fully open tendering for all works within that area. Whereas we think if it's already been competitively tendered, that's already satisfied that, so we can avoid those obligations. And then I think it's the final slide now. You're probably glad to know it is quite hard to make a consultation really exciting. But some of the other things that we think we should be pushing, recommending. One is that zoning coordinators should have a role to engage both of the buildings, mandatable buildings, and the heat sources as part of zoning development, just to have that kind of relationship and help with coordination. Zoning coordinators should also have a greater role to refine the recommended zones presented by the central authority. At the moment, they seem to want to limit our ability to do that. And we think we know our areas and we're much better able to set a really sensible zone than something that's set centrally. There's also a proposal that prior to establishing a zone, once the local authority has designated the area that it wants to set, then there is only a 21-day consultation period. To me, this just feels far, far too short. No one's able to give any proper consideration to a zone in 21 days. We feel this should be longer. Not quite sure how long, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, but I think it's something that we should talk to planning colleagues about, or push back on. And then a couple of other areas that make this policy work better. One is to create a loan facility with deferred repayments to enable delivery bodies to invest in the huge amount of capital that's required to make these things work. For Leeds, the zone is £650 million. You need to put a lot of that in the ground before you get revenues. So you just need that ability to afford to do that. And then the final point is around consistency on carbon standards. They're focusing on trying to make zones low carbon, which is absolutely the right way to go. But there is the ability for mandated buildings to apply for an exemption on the basis that they've got a better or lower carbon approach to their building. And if that's not done carefully, then we could see a whole load of applications for air source heat pumps within the zoning area, which would just would mean that the electricity capacity that we've got nationally is focused in an area where actually district heating is better delivered. So it's quite a technical point, but a really fundamental one to making the policy really, really work. And I will stop there. So I'll pass it over to you. I mean, my view is that it's a positive policy, which we should endorse. We plan to put in a consultation response by the end of February. And I think the proposal within the paper I submitted was for this body to endorse that Polly gives final sign off of that consultation response. But I'm really interested in any kind of general or specific comments, particularly around impacts on our services or impacts on these.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, George. Very much appreciated, and quite a lot for us all to take in. Anybody want to put hands up with first comments or questions?
Can't have been that clear.
Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, George. That's very interesting. My sort of thought reading the initial briefing was I was sort of particularly exercised about the points that you subsequently addressed, actually, that it did occur to me that the funding regime was really not very clear. It was difficult to understand how this was to be paid for, and I'm glad that you emphasised that in the your thoughts on what should go into the response to the consultation. One thing that occurred to me is, I mean, obviously here this is focused pretty much mainly on the sort of where these zones should be. And I know the how, like the way the source of the energy isn't quite the scope, quite the scope of the consultation. Nonetheless, I'm just wondering, with the zones that we've defined, what would you anticipate the sort? I mean, I know obviously this is going to be sort of for the potential providers to come forward, but what would you anticipate the heat sources being? I mean, I know we have our pipes network based on the RERP at the moment. There is always talk of heat pumps and the potential for heat pumps. What do you think would be the likely sources for the mechanisms that are established here, please? Thank you.
I think, yeah, it's a really fundamental question, because the way I see it working is zones kind of growing up around a low carbon heat source. So within Leeds, we have current energy from waste plant, the energy from waste plant under construction. We have large sources of industrial waste heat, so things like the glass factory or some of the industrial processes still at East Leeds. And then we also have heat from things like data centers, where it's relatively low grade heat, but with the use of heat pumps to step that heat up, that's a very efficient way of delivering heat. And similarly, in the south and east of the city, we've got the significant old mine workings. So it's been proven in other areas that, again, using heat pumps to step up that heat is a great way of getting large volumes of heat into a network, far cheaper than having individual air source heat pumps attached to particular buildings. But I think that the way it's likely to be delivered is initially focusing on some of the point sources of heat, and then using all the kind of environmental heat that's available. So things like sewage source heat pumps are an area that are beginning to gain traction. So it's going to be a really mixed economy, but that's a key part of that zoning coordinator role, just to do that kind of heat source study right at the beginning before they kind of release the tenders.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Thank you. You happy with that, Councillor Rowntree? Did you want to come in again?
No, that's a really good answer. Thanks for that information. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Downs?
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of quick questions. One is, it said about financial penalties. I assume they're collected by the local authority, and if so, where do they go? Will they be ring-fenced to be used on the schemes, or is it just going into council's coffers, or does it go back to the government? And then the other thing is, obviously, I fully understand the fact that it will be centred on the larger areas in the centre of Leeds. But is this something that could potentially work for some community centres outside of Leeds, such as Aireborough or Otley or Wetherby or those areas, or is it going to be simply limited to the inner city areas? Thank you.
Both great questions. The first one I hadn't even thought of. I don't think there is anything in the consultation which says where the penalties will go. My anticipation is that they would sit with the zoning coordinator or potentially the delivery body, because essentially they are levied where buildings that are mandated to connect don't cooperate. So I could see it being almost a compensation mechanism for delivery bodies who invested in the cost of putting pipes in the ground, and then customers who they expect to come along don't come along. But we will specifically scrutinise that and put a request in for clarity, and suggest that it is within either us or the delivery body. And then in terms of smaller zones, yeah, again, a really useful question. This slide here shows all those areas which could potentially support heat network zoning. In the consultation, they've, I think, correctly acknowledged that when this policy kicks off in 2025, there's going to be a huge amount of pressure on the industry. You can't do everything all at once nationally. So there's a process where the central authority will publish all of the areas that are seen as opportunity areas, those areas like these kind of smaller ones here, which could potentially support district heating zoning. And then it'll be up to the local zoning coordinator to bring them forward kind of bit by bit as that capacity to deliver them grows. There's also a proposal that there would be the ability for a third party essentially to request a particular area comes forward as a zone, if there's a particular development or a heat source or a community organisation that sees a way that it could be delivered. But we do need to kind of acknowledge this is quite a big step up from where we are. So I think it will be a case of picking up the bigger areas first, or those areas where there is a really good opportunity, like a particular business that's got particular available low carbon heat.
Thank you. Councillor Downs, your hand's still up. Did you want to come in again?
No, sorry, I'll lower that. No, that's fine. Thank you for that answer, George.
Thank you. Councillor Carlisle.
Yeah, thanks, George. Yeah, this is good because district heating has such potential. But just sorry if this wasn't your presentation and I just missed it. But there's in our ward in Hunsdon Riverside, I mean, I presume you know there's two district heating systems I'm aware of on newish builds developments from about 10-15 years ago. One of them's, well, they're both dysfunctional in different ways, but that's almost another thing. I suppose the residents there would be interested to know, are they going to be given, they've often asked, and I just don't think there's any mechanisms at all about how they can hold their supplier to account, because unlike with other, you know, if you're in a house and you're not happy with your energy supply, you can switch, and they can't switch. They're locked into these providers. So is there, but providers would say, well, we had to kind of fork out loads of money up front to kind of create the system, so we can't build the system, then all be thrown out collectively like a few months down the line. So is that in there? And also is there learning? Are you or others in dialogue with those providers who, or recipients of district heat, to specifically learn from those, I suppose, what you call pilots? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So this policy really focuses on kind of larger buildings. So it's not intended that individual dwellings would be kind of mandated to connect. But if there was a large new development of a significant housing growth in a particular area, that would be mandated to connect. I think what you're talking about is a particular issue. There's quite a number of small community heating networks focus on a particular housing estate or new build project, which were built with gas CHP in the kind of early 2000s, when that was the right thing to do. Since then, gas prices have gone through the roof, and a lot of the residents are left paying a huge amount for their bills, and it's well understood at a national level. So the thing that government is bringing in alongside the district heating or heat network zoning policy is a heat network regulation, where instead of it being an unregulated utility, heat networks will be regulated, with Ofgem providing that kind of regulatory route and a route for householders who are unhappy with the provision that they have to complain and get some form of redress. I haven't looked at that in as much detail as this, but it is also due to kick off in 2025, and I think that is probably going to be the most suitable route for people to deal with dysfunctional systems that are out there.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's a kind of specific question, George, unfortunately. We have a planning application currently in the outer northeast, which is for between 800 and 1,200 houses altogether. And we've been pushing them really hard to look at alternative sources of heating. There is going to be no gas whatsoever on that site. There's two sites that adjoin each other. And they are talking about doing a local heating system with some kind of heat source pump. They're working on the best options at the moment, but they're looking at doing that. Now, if they carry on and do that, that would go through the current planning application process, I guess. But where would these zoning coordinators then have any effect on it? Would they be able to say, whoa, hang on a minute, we don't want you to deliver that yourself? Or would they have an input into that in the future, do you think?
It's a brilliant question. If I could have planted a question, it would have been something like that. Because it illustrates some of the difficulties that government have been wrestling with. Essentially, what they're saying is that they don't want zoning to delay any kind of good proposals which are being brought forward already. So that sort of example looks like a really sensible one, where you have very significant housing development with no gas on site. The implications of that is that the site's likely to have its own district heating network, probably with heat pumps providing the kind of central heat source for that. Once that's done, if you've got that infrastructure in place, then it would be dead easy for a future network to plug into that and replace the smaller scale heat pumps with kind of larger scale heat from industrial waste heat or from mine heat or whatever. The critical thing at the moment is trying to encourage new developments to build with wet central heating systems rather than kind of individual electric solutions or individual air source heat pumps within each dwelling. If there is a communal network, that you can replace that heat source with almost anything over time. So I think the question in terms of what would the zoning coordinator do in future, they would have a role to try to kind of bring things together to make sure that the delivery body is aware of what's being proposed on a particular site, and if possible to get them to connect from day one. But if it's not possible to connect from day one, then the role would be to try and push them to have that kind of wet central heating system with a plan to connect to the future date.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for those questions, and thank you, George, for answering. I don't see anybody else. So in that case, can I ask one, George? Can I ask about where does this leads in terms of the work that's being and has been done already. You know, in terms of the figures you mentioned, it sounds tiny in comparison for where the plans are going. And you also mentioned issues in terms of the kind of attractive sites and what to do with the ones that are on the periphery. So just a few comments really on where we're at. That map is really useful. What do we anticipate changing in terms of I guess where the pipes are already and where we've got plans to, but what can we do to bring the other bits in?
So I think overall, it's really very positive. The worst case scenario would be that we were left with a network serving city centre and Air Valley, assuming we have our Green Heat Network funded project built. Go to exec board in February partly about that, so we will wait for exec board decisions on it. But we would have that as a standalone network with additional powers, and then the ability to bid for extensions to that zone as they were brought forward. So that would be if they've stuck with this requirement to have each of these areas competitively procured. I think the best case scenario is that we win those arguments about trying to make zones kind of contiguous and workable, and just have that ability to deliver the whole of the zone through our existing network. There are some quite significant implications for the council in terms of £650 million worth of investment. I don't think it would break any state secrets to say we're unlikely to fund that entirely ourselves, so we would need to look at different delivery structures. Polly and the team are looking at things at the moment, and again, we're going to take a few options to exec board in February. But essentially, those cover things like joint venture arrangements. But ultimately, it should create a lot of clarity and help with some of the difficulties we have with some developers, particularly in the city centre, saying that they want to go down a heat pump route because that has a net zero flight path, whereas district heating, because it's from combustion, doesn't quite have that same flight path. It will create a lot more certainty and something that's just better to deliver.
Thank you, George. Really appreciate that. Before I close this item, any more comments? Any other officers want to come in with any comments? Okay, so thank you, George. If you look at the recommendation in our packet, it says that the intention is for the Chief Officer to respond to the consultation on behalf of the Council in consultation with the Chair of this committee. So if we're all happy with that, then can I say thank you for all the work that's gone into this piece of work, but also in anticipation of an awful lot of future work. So thank you very much for that. And George, you also agreed that you would look for some clarity about financial penalties. So thank you for agreeing to do that. So that brings this item to a close. Thank you very much. And we are on to item 9, which is an update on Connecting Leeds Transport Strategy. I think we have Paul on the call, and did I see Gary has joined us, I presume, for this item too. So thank you very much. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to run through the report that I circulated, and I think the two key parts of that. One, the key performance indicators and data that we now have, and also then looking at some of the key interventions that we've made in the last year based on our annual progress report, which we presented to exec board in November. Just to remind members, the key part of the transport strategy, which is around carbon emissions and reduction in carbon emissions, is a three-pronged approach, if you like, and that is first to reduce the amount of distance travelled. So the target within the transport strategy is a 30% reduction in overall distance travelled, to shift to public transport and active modes, which have a much lower carbon footprint. Again, a 30% shift from private car, which would mean 130% increase in bus, 70% increase in rail, 400% in cycling, and 30% in walking. So, you know, big numbers, and all those were set from 2016 figures, where rail and bus, for instance, which I'll show later, haven't recovered to those sorts of levels yet either. And then finally, the third element is to decarbonize the vehicle fleet that remains, that's essential for us to use. So I'm just going to so can you see my screen now? So I'm going to talk through some of the numbers that I've set out in the report. This table, and if we just look at the top line, really shows this is DFT data, national data, and unfortunately there's a bit of a lag in collecting this data, and in a way, part of the point highlighted by Chad earlier was that actually the data that we need to report and monitor, etc., is quite a challenge. But this is the national data on kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent from transport in Leeds, and you can see the trend has obviously went down during 2020, but started in 2021. So I think in terms of us looking at our picture of a 2030 target of being net zero and transport's contribution to that, while we're lower than 2019, the trend now is upward again. And I look at the traffic data we have for the distance travelled, which carbon obviously tends to follow, the emissions levels tend to follow that pretty directly. You can see we do have the 2022 data for that, and again it's continued to increase from that 21 figure. So when we get the carbon figures for 22, again I would expect that they will have risen from 21. There's obviously a bit of a factor in there. It's not all purely down to that. It will be reduced slightly by uptake of EV and lower emission vehicles, if that is a trend that we get, although I've got a stat on that next. So that's just that position really, to show that, you know, we are, in terms of the data that we can monitor at a global city level, we've still got a huge challenge on our hands. Sorry, I'm skipping about the report, but in indicator 4, we have got those numbers of and those were mentioned earlier in terms of vehicle uptake, zero emission vehicle uptake in the city, and the one, you know, they're all going in the right direction. There's been some quite big numbers of increases since 2018 to now. You can see that in terms of car total, there are 26,000 registered vehicles in Leeds now that are zero emission. But that needs to be taken in the context. Sorry, I'm going to sound like a harbinger of doom throughout this presentation. In the context, that's there's 407,000 vehicles registered. So that's only under 7% of all the vehicles at the moment in Leeds are EV. So still a huge way to go to actually change that mix. And I guess you know as you walk around the city, you see more green number plates now, but you know it isn't every other one at all. A long way from that. Okay, I think so. In terms of some of the positive stories that we've seen in the data that we collect, where we have made some interventions or we have some influence, we are seeing some positive trends. So I will present now to indicator 3, which is our central cordon data. And what we collect here is the number of people coming through a ring around the city centre in the morning peak. So traditionally we've collected this for a number of years because we were always looking at commuter journeys and looking to reduce them. Transport strategy was all about that before. Obviously we've shifted to every journey matters now if you're looking at carbon, but this is sort of a long-term trend data that we've got here. And what you can see and I think obviously the total persons has reduced as we've seen for city centre in terms of changing office use, and that the changes that have happened post-COVID in terms of working. But what is quite interesting with this data is between 22 and 23, we still had the same number in terms of 85,000 coming over the cordon, but we had quite a dramatic shift in the way people travelled. So a 10% reduction in car use, walking, cycling, bus and rail increasing in that same time. So the same number of people still coming in, but we've achieved that shift. Now, obviously, one of the big interventions we made in year was the closure of City Square and the changes we made to the city centre. So you can see where we do have influence, where we're making those positive changes, we are getting that effect of change. So that's one of the positive stories. But again, the context is that is a 6,000 reduction in vehicles. But if you like, district wide, there are probably over 1 million. There are over 1 million journeys every day. So a small part of that overall change being achieved, but where we can do it. The next one I wanted to talk about was, and again, this is quite a good long-term trend, is the travel to work survey that we do. Get 5. So this is all businesses. A lot of businesses, some businesses voluntarily do this survey, and a lot it's mandated through the planning system where new offices happen. They join our the travel plan network, and introduce the measures through that around car sharing, promoting alternative forms of travel, etc. And you can see over time that trend has continued to decrease the total car use and improvements in some of the other. Obviously, there's been some effect again around that working from home and the different numbers, but we are seeing that continued reduction in 21 to 22, where probably a similar type of work environment, that we've got to sort of that new normal. Then you can see we're continuing to get that reduction, and I think that comes about from two parts. One, that businesses are taking their carbon emissions and green credentials seriously and are looking at measures within their transport plans to reduce vehicle mileage and carbon output. But also, I guess, through the planning system, where actually new developments tend to have less car parking spaces than previously, and that's a good tool in terms of reducing private car use trips to the city centre. And there's examples of that all over. For instance, Lloyds Banking Group currently in their office just near us, near me here, have got 400 parking spaces. They're looking at relocating later this year, and there are only 30 spaces. So we're seeing that trend, and the numbers at places like Wellington Place, etc. The car numbers per employee are relatively low in terms of parking spaces. That's where we've got another positive benefit. I think it's worth also highlighting the work we do on influencing travel behaviour. There's some good numbers in terms of the amount of work that we do in terms of training. So the teams go out and do road safety training, but at the same time they deliver that message around sustainable travel in the best form. So we delivered over 14,000 training in terms of pedestrian, scooter and cycle training across the city in schools, and that continues to happen. Really valuable resource that we do. I think the other numbers, I'm going to move to the top, but looking at doing these shifts that we need to do, we also need to be cognizant of our other strategies, and those around health and well-being, and especially on the roads, our Vision Zero strategy around reducing those people who are killed and seriously injured on the road to zero by 2040. And so while we're looking at the mode shift, we need to ensure that there's a safe environment where people feel safe to travel and are safer to travel on the roads. And while as the council, we're delivering changes to the physical environment of the highway infrastructure. There also needs to be a huge change in attitudes and enforcement on that as well. So, you know, in terms of speeding, drink driving, etc., wearing seatbelt, and there's others. That messaging needs to be out there in terms of people feeling like they can travel safely, and then we can move a little bit more to that culture where actually the the natural choice for short journeys is to walk, wheel, or cycle, and that's key to our strategy going forward. Okay, Chair, I'm just going to share a table. This is sort of section 2 of my report in terms of some of the key things we've done in the last year on the transport strategy. So there's a lot of work, and again, not just us, the combined authority are a key partner and play a part in this, in terms of bus reform. And that target I mentioned before around increasing bus travel, if we're going to make the urban environment of Leeds work for public transport, there needs to be an improvement in the bus services that are out there. And that consultation has been undertaken on options around bus reform, whether that be greater enhanced partnerships or franchising. Taking that control and having that ability to shape the network and invest in that is really important. So that work is continuing with the mayor and the team. Alongside that, and been out for quite a while now, is the reduction in the mayor's fares, which is where there's £2 for a single journey or £4.50 for a day travel across West Yorkshire. Again, reducing the cost of travel and making that easier for people. So that's been a great scheme. I'm afraid I don't have the data behind how that's affected patronage, but it has a positive story, I believe. The next three, and I mentioned the Vision Zero, but these other two bits of policy that we've added are helping us shape the way we design our scheme. So both in terms of the Healthier Streets approach, which is about making places where people feel they want to be, often changing it from sort of that highway road environment to something of more of a street where people want to be, dwell, walk through, etc., is part of that. So we've adopted that approach, and there's a toolkit that we use when we're designing schemes. And also our road space reallocation, we've got a streetscape policy, again looking at which users we prioritize and how we prioritize the space when we're designing new schemes. Shifting to sustainable transport. Some of the key infrastructure investments that have gone in and been completed, I mentioned City Square before, and you know, a huge amount of work by the team across highways and transportation and the rest of city development to get that scheme delivered. Alongside that, obviously there's the work on Armley Gyratory in the Ring Road, and National Highways working on the M61 at the same time to facilitate those changes. A lot of work on rail. You've seen the Leeds City Station works are underway. Morley was finished as part of the Transpennine, and White Rose Station, new station, going to be opened later this year. Alongside Thorpe Park Station looking to start on site as well. So again, adding those options for people to travel sustainably. The Think Hill scheme in Horsforth has been completed recently. Really incorporating in as many of the features we can in terms of pedestrian cycle use, bus priority measures alongside that scheme. And then EV charging, I think Chad had an update on that in terms of charge points, and continue to work on how we can deliver more charge points across the city, and working with third-party providers to get those in, especially the solutions around residential properties who do not have off-street parking, and how they can therefore get a fair and equitable price for their EV charging. You will have, if you've been into the city centre, you shouldn't have failed to notice that we also launched our e-bike hire scheme in September. Really positive uptake on that early on, obviously slightly reduced over the winter months, but hopefully by next summer we'll see lots of people using them. And for me particularly, I feel this is a really useful taster for people in terms of how good an e-bike can be in a hilly city, because we do have quite a lot of gradients. I'm a convert and have been for a number of years, and it's a really good way to travel around, space efficient, environmentally friendly way to travel around the city, and hopefully this will give people a taste, and then they can go on and maybe purchase their own as well. We've also done other innovation in terms of, we've got some delivery robots, trials of those across the city as well. And I think while this is often overlooked and it's not obvious, we are doing a huge amount of work on the signal technology that we have in the city to make the journeys much more efficient, especially in terms of working and talking to the public transport, the buses, getting them through with less delay, etc. So a lot of work going into that element as well. So I think that's a sort of summary from me, Chair. Just around that while there are some great examples of what we have done and moving us in a positive direction, the overall picture is still, there is a huge amount to do in terms of that 2030 target, and it is a real challenge. And we are working now with the team, looking at what we can which measures we should be putting in our action plan too. Because the first action plan ends this year, we need to publish a second action plan alongside the strategy for the next 3 years to look at the measures that can maybe accelerate our progress. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and take Gary himself can take any questions that members have.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. Some excellent points and some really good data to share with us. Gary, did you want to add anything before I open to questions, or are you just going to come in on questions?
Well, just very briefly, Chair, all I would say is to emphasise the last points that Paul made. I think he's articulated very well the amount of work and the wide range of work that's taking place, from, if you like, the very large schemes like Army Gyratory to very local schemes as well. But ultimately, there is a lot to do to hit the targets that the council has set by 2030, and we update the executive board on an annual basis to reflect that as well. So, as I said, I just wanted to emphasise the amount of work and the broad range of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Gary. Okay, I'll go to questions now, and the first one I've got is Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple of things. Just concern about the lack of integration between, for example, bus and rail. So in the outer northwest, we have lots of people using the station, but a lot of people walk there. Cycling is somewhat limited because the roads are so busy, and we've not had active travel investment. There's been little or nothing for years. So people are driving to the station. We've then got the added complication of proposed car parking charges, largely for people using that as a means to access the rail service into Leeds or elsewhere. So just really keen for us to look at all of this, all of these pieces together. I know it's difficult when we don't control the buses, we don't control the rail services, getting them to talk to each other is virtually impossible. But because people can't get, say, from home to the station by bus reliably, they will drive to the station, they will park there. They're now concerned they're going to have to pay to park near the station. How do we join this up more effectively and bring people together and make sure that we get the active travel investment around stations as well? Sorry, this is a bit rambling. The other challenge is getting road safety measures in place. We have areas where we know there are issues, we know the mean speed is being exceeded, but it's a constant fight to get. I understand the funding context that we're in and the challenges, but where we know there are issues, it's really difficult to get even signs put up or to get those road safety measures in place so children can walk to school safely, can cycle to school safely, that parents aren't worried that they or their children or their dogs are going to be knocked down in the process. So I know that's a lot in a short space, but any feedback on any of it would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to come in on that one?
Is it good? No, okay. I think you almost answered your question about the rail and bus integration point within the question. I think you're right that the model where there's more public control of that gives you an option to do some of those measures, and I think that's where ultimately the solution is. as you say, we can continue to talk to the operators. In a way, though, the other bit is you need the demand, don't you? So even if a public body was running a bus service, they'd still want it to be viable or to give enough social good from it. So you need the patronage and you need the people. So building up that demand is part of what would be needed as well. I think, and then the other points that you raise, funding is the fundamental issue around that. The level of funding for, the majority of our capital funding for infrastructure comes through central government. A lot of it is for larger scale investments, not for the everyday smaller interventions and grouping them. We have, through our CRSDS program, started to try and shift that a little bit. The next funding round of that would start in 27, and again we feel that there's an opportunity that the indications are that will go up, and again we need to put a strong case that groups of the smaller interventions around local areas are part of that picture, not just one-off bigger interventions. So yeah, we've been working on that, but it is that challenge of funding really. We are looking to develop a plan for each community committee area, a local area transport plan for each community area. We'll started on the one in West, and then we're going to roll them out depending on the team's resources, to get to a point where we then at least have the knowledge of what's needed, how much it might cost, and it gives us a platform to either secure that from other grants, developer funding, etc. So we can set out what local priorities are and make a case that we know what they are, rather than just say no, we don't get enough money. We can go with this is our plan and we need X to deliver it, please. So it's a better, more compelling narrative.
Thank you. Thank you for that question and answer. Councillor Bowden is next on my list.
Right, Chair. Sorry, I put a message in the chat if you wouldn't mind reading it out.
Absolutely. So, have we had conversations with the Beryl Bike Company as an authority? Speaking to residents and friends, the costs seems far too high, and it would be cheaper and simpler to jump in a taxi. So, Headingley, Hyde Park, City Centre, over £5. I find that pretty shocking, and it seems to be pricing people out who would use it.
I don't know, Gary, if you've been in the meetings with them, but yeah, we obviously it is a partnership. We have procured them, so there is a team working on that element. Appreciate the point around the costs. I think it depends how, again, a bit like mobile phone contracts, there are multiple pricing structures on this, and so it can be, the more you use, the cheaper it can be, and it's just they've obviously Beryl are one of the biggest companies that do this across the country, and they've had to have a model that's sustainable. We don't want to be subsidising that as the council. I mean, you could reduce the costs if we could find some funding to do that, but would that be the right use of that funding? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I haven't heard that comment being made to me personally in recent times, so that's something we can certainly take away and have conversations with colleagues who attend the project board. Happy to do that, Chair.
Thank you. That would be appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Shazad.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, and one following on from what Councillor Bowden has said. A lot of young families that want to actually use the e-bikes, they're actually worried about the safety, because they think we're encouraging everybody to wear helmets and other gear when they're on a normal push bike and on these e-bikes, which can travel at some speeds as well. And especially if you're using them in the city centre, how safe are they? Because obviously, in the sense, I've seen a few thrown about and a few maybe, I don't know if you've got any sort of reports on how many sort of accidents or near misses we've had with these e-bikes, and I haven't tried one, so I don't know how easy they are to control. But that was one of the things that one of the residents pointed out to me, because they go, it's lovely to have the bikes, but we don't feel safe because we're not going to carry just because we're going into the city centre, we're not going to carry some sort of safety gear with like a helmet or something like that. So we were a bit worried about using them. Then one of the other questions is this: that now we've obviously improved the air quality on Neville Street. What has been the knock-on effect on Air Street at the back at the train station? Because we are still getting complaints from residents about I know we've had the Army Geriatry roadworks, but there are complaints of obviously standstill traffic at times. And has the air quality actually got worse down at Air Street compared to before we did the Neville Street works for the City Square? And also, what is the impact of some of the works on the nighttime economy? If you actually look at the cameras, you will see standstill traffic with engines running on Lower Briggate and other areas where the night economy is at its most popular, or where there is a demand for a lot of pickups and drop-offs from and I know a lot of the taxis have now reverted to the more climate-friendly hybrid or electric options. But do we take any measurements at night time, especially when people are intoxicated, the impact on their lungs from the fumes from standstill traffic? And also, again, a point that Councillor Thompson made, we unfortunately, I know we can't revisit the city, but there's no real connectivity, and people feel like, I mean, a resident mentioned to me that they tend to go to Bradford because the reason why they go to Bradford for theatres and so on and so forth, the lack of disability parking for people now since all these changes, they're not at the places where people with disabilities would like to go. I mean, prime example they gave, they said all the way along the lay-by by the bus station, it's a taxi rank, and then you are quite a distance back. They've kind of removed most of the disability parking away from places where people want access, and I think that used to be the same for the Grand Theatre as well. And that's why they said, I know it's a longer drive, but it's impacting the carbon. They're going all the way down to Bradford to go to the theatre because they feel like for disabled people, the city centre, with all the new changes, just does not accommodate them. And I don't know what your views are on that, Gary. It'd be nice to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you. So a number of questions there. Paul, Gary, Polly might want to come in too. Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll make a start, and then perhaps other colleagues can finish off if I miss anything. Yeah, the disabled bays issue is one that is often made. We have put information online to show where all the bays are across the city, and obviously there is provision with able to park on double yellow lines as well without loading restrictions. But you'll appreciate in the city centre the demand for curb space, be it for bus stops, for taxis, for loading, for general access, and for disabled. It's under great demand in the city centre, and there is only so much. So it's always a balancing act between the various different competing demands. But we do try to look for new provision where we can. But it's in that context that, if you like, everybody is after a bit of that curbside for their use, and there's only a finite demand supply for it. Air quality. It's a question that's been asked recently, and we are working with our colleagues on the environmental side who sit outside my service. But they are doing some work to monitor air quality. So I don't think we've got the answers yet in terms of the impact of the changes. I know colleagues are looking at it, and no doubt reports will be forthcoming in the near future. But it's a point that we're really interested to see the impact of what's been done, particularly on Neville Street, where it was recognised as one of the worst. Well, it was the worst in the city, and I think in the region. And I've heard people say that maybe even nationally as well. So we do hope to see an obvious improvement there. And yeah, we need to understand any deleterious impacts elsewhere through the work that we've done. So we haven't got the answers to that yet, but hopefully in the near future, working with our colleagues. In terms of the delivery, the barrel bikes, again, I think that was the first question. Again, I don't personally know the answer to the helmet one. I need to ask colleagues questions of that one. I'm not aware of any safety issues associated with the barrel bikes yet, or incidents occurring with the barrel bikes. I am aware often we do receive comments about some of the delivery drivers, riders, if I call them that, in the city centre. And we do work with the police very closely on these, because so some of the vehicles that are being used are illegal. And I have witnessed myself police operations at the bottom of Briggate to actually stop these bikes. In fact, it was a very large operation. There was an HGV and lots of police persons in attendance and loading illegal bikes onto the back of the truck. So it's quite an impressive sight to see it. But we are aware of the issues and the reports, and we continue to work with colleagues on that. But Paul, I don't know if you wanted to add anything that I may have missed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, you could spend a long time having a debate about use of helmets when cycling, and it's not one I particularly want to get into. But I think you know, where you see cities where cycling is a huge part of the culture and the mode shift, you know, in places like Copenhagen or Ghent or in Holland, you know, helmet use isn't there. But at the moment, the culture here and the way you know, the environment you have to cycle in, you feel that's probably a choice that most people do make or want to make. So appreciate that. I think our long-term vision has to be around trying to make the people feel safe enough on our streets doing that. The only other bit I was going to mention on the nighttime economy, and again, sounds like I'm using the same reason all the time, but again, that the demand for travel to the city centre by either private vehicles dropping people off or the taxi and private hire trade in the evening is when bus services really tail off and are a lot lower. And again, in a you know, maybe part of the solution is looking at running buses later into the evening at higher frequencies and keeping that demand up, so that actually the travel is done in a more efficient way in terms of getting multiple people in a vehicle rather than one or two per vehicle. So I think there's a longer term shift that you probably need to work on to resolve some of the issues that we're having in the city centre at the moment. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to add, Gary.
Sorry, I was muted. Anybody else want to come in on that one, or shall I move on? Okay, so just before I go to Councillor Thompson and Councillor Downs, Councillor Bowden's put in the chat, just for clarity, did the company totally fund the installations of barrel bikes, or have we part funded it?
Yeah, so we've part fund.
Sorry, go on, Paul.
I was going to say, yeah, there was part funding from the Transforming Cities Fund that's come via government and the combined authority for the scheme to actually purchase the bikes and docks.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Just sorry, just tried to press all the right buttons in the right order. Just so if it's okay to come back on, one of the questions was specifically around the car parking for rail use. So we want to encourage people onto the trains, but how, of the things we can control, because I know there are things we can't, like the buses, of the things we do have control of, just keen to see that we do that as much as possible and that we're not dissuading people. I absolutely understand the questions around the car, around the reasoning behind the push to charge for car parking, but there are particular cases where there are concerns it may dissuade rail users, it may put people off doing the right thing. But a good note on the barrel bikes, I'd not ridden a bike for many, many years. I had to go on a barrel bike. It was very easy to ride and control, and doesn't go half as fast as the giant ones in the city centre that, yeah, cause different issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to comment on the first point?
I mean, I think it's noted that where you increase the costs of something for people, it dissuades a proportion of people from doing it. So yeah, we need to carefully consider those measures.
Thank you. So I've just noticed Councillor Carlill came in on that. Are you wanting to add to that particular point? No.
No, I've just got a question in.
Right.
When
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
I'll bring Councillor Downs in then.
Yeah, thanks. A few points. One is, I think it was Paul that mentioned about one of the challenges of improving sort of public transport and bus services is to make sure that it's viable and that there are enough passengers. The problem is that what's been happening in the area, and also particularly since COVID, is that the opposite's been happening. The bus services have been decreasing in both reliability and frequency, certainly to my ward. And as such, people lose confidence and faith in them. And I know of people that have actually gone out and learnt to drive a car simply because they can no longer rely on the bus and they need to get to work. So you've got a massive job, and it's the most important job to do, to convince the public to get back onto public transport, whether it's done via carrot or stick. I don't know what the best option is, but it's a problem that, especially for carbon, we need to address, and we need to come up with a plan to get people back into public transport. That's point one. Point two was when you talk off the top of your head, you forget what your first 2 points were. I'll let you come back on that one first, and then I'll just try and remember what the other two were.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Sorry, Gary.
Yeah, I was just going to say we agree with the comment. I think for the transport strategy and the work streams that Paul's highlighted in his report needs to work. We need the public transport, both bus and rail, to be working to its maximum to assist with the measures that we're introducing as well. And I think we're all aware of the issues that have been prevailing in recent times, not least COVID, and then issues with bus operations in recent times. So yeah, we need both to be working at full capacity and hopefully increase capacity over time. Yeah,
I've remembered what the other two bits were. One is there's a bit about road accident reduction, and it's something that I've been on Metro in the past, and I'm on the Fire Authority where they're looking at accident reduction down to zero. It's almost an impossible goal because there are so many factors out there which you can't control. So I don't know how you can get down to zero. It'd be interesting to sort of see a policy that would do so. But one little bugbear of mine, and whilst I'm happy to support cycling, and I do cycle from time to time, I came through Leeds last night in the storm, and there were I saw 3 consecutive bikes. None of them had lights on. One was a Deliveroo driver. Actually, they did have a front light after I passed them, but from behind there was no lighting. There was not even any reflection on them. And I've always found this coming through sort of the Headingley corridor out of Leeds, that the number of cyclists that just are not visible. And if you want to reduce accidents, I don't know how many of them end up in accidents, but I don't think it's a good thing to have cyclists without lights on.
No, and I agree with that. And I think I've said either at this meeting or a scrutiny meeting, the ambition around Vision Zero is probably the toughest that we'll ever face, because of all the factors that are involved in collisions that do occur on the public highway. Undoubtedly, as has been touched on, changing people's behaviour, whether they're riding bikes, having the lights on or not, wearing reflective clothing, speeding, not drinking and driving, not wearing a seatbelt, etc., are going to be all key factors that everybody, and it's not just the highway authority, but everybody outside can help with. and it's about having a conversation with as wide a group as possible, with family, friends, relatives, etc., etc., to just ask people to just think about what they're doing on the public highway. I could wax lyrical about this for a long time, but it is such an important topic for us all, and every collision that results in a fatal or serious is very tragic, and for people that are involved and all those associated with them as well. And I don't regret us being ambitious in terms of going for this target, and by 2040 we may not hit it, but if we can save as many lives and injuries as possible in the meantime, that must be something that we should aim for. And there's a lot of people that are very passionate about that as well, and let's work together to spread the word and encourage safe use of the public highway.
It's worth adding to the net zero, the Vision Zero point, that Oslo did actually achieve it. So there are examples where if you get the right conditions, the right change in social attitudes, you can actually achieve that reduction. In fatalities. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Paul. Okay, Councillor Carlisle.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of a more wider question, because I'm looking at the figures that you supplied, Paul. Thanks for those. And as you said, as you were going through, the ones for the city centre are the ones that are going in the most promising direction, with the amount of private car journeys going into the city centre having decreased. And I think, was it the only one that's decreased on 2019 figures, let alone just on the last couple of years? But the obviously there's a considerable amount of work that's gone on the city centre. Possibly, I think we've said in one of these meetings before, I think I heard it's more than we've ever spent before, in terms of highways works. That also has the biggest alternative, and we've talked about the bus services and the rail services. I think the majority of us can probably get to the city centre in a sustainable way. Unfortunately, as we know in many areas, getting from one suburb to another or getting to your nearest district centre isn't quite so easy. So I guess the question is more around all that funding that we've put into the city centre, and those works seem to be having the desired effect, and we're cracking on with those. But how do we tackle those district centre sides of it? You know, how do you get my journey from Barnsley to Pudsey easier so I can go to the bank, etc.? Those journeys people make every day. Because I think they're the real challenge, and the ones probably people are making more, if not less now.
No, I agree. And one of my former colleagues, haven't updated the stats recently, but he often used to quote the figure that only 20% of journeys in Leeds have an origin or destination in the city centre. And so yeah, we have got to look at how we can change behaviours in the other 80% of journeys. I think again, it's the distances involved are the sort of journeys that are sometimes suitable for walking and cycling. And so creating the safe environment on the highway is really important for that. Really challenging for us in a lot of places where, you know, there's a historical streetscape that was built before even sometimes the advent of the motor car in any sort of form. So yeah, we've obviously got a huge challenge in doing that, but we can look at solutions. Some places we've started, you know, you could start to do that, but it is about having a network and a change in attitude, and a change in the environment within those streets to make people change. And whenever we do behavior change discussions, we have focus groups, we ask people, what is it that, you know, we had a walk it ride it campaign, talking to people about how they might be more active, use those modes more. That's one of the biggest things, is that safety, perception of safety, personal safety, all those things need to be put in place to make it work. And so we've got to change the environment out there on the streets to allow people to do that.
This is where our healthier streets and the local area transport plans come to the fore, and we are trialling it in a couple of areas at the moment. And I encourage members, when it comes to your area, to hopefully in due course that encourage residents to participate in it and tell us what all the local issues are, so that ultimately then we can go into battle, if you like, to secure funding for some of the improvements. Clearly, it's not an overnight solution, but understanding what the local issues are will assist and hopefully identify the funding ultimately for the schemes to be completed.
Thank you for those answers, and I note that Councillor Thompson has put that she would be happy to support that work as chair of the Outer North West Community Committee, and I think all of us who might not hold positions but are active with our community committees will be very keen to support that. I think we know our areas, we know the types of journeys that a lot of people want to make locally, and I think that's really important. And it was one of the things that I was going to bring up as one of my questions, that well, it's just been said, those journeys are the majority of journeys, and if we can make them more attractive and safer for people to make sustainable journeys, I think that's an important piece of work for us. And I guess that local travel plan is going to look at that. And I would imagine if we had more than 10 minutes left, we could probably get into a whole discussion about journeys to and from schools, which are very local journeys that often appear in terms of huge traffic problems, that it will be fabulous to be able to address those around the city. I also note from the chat that Paul's put a link which I've just clicked on, so thank you very much. We can all look at that at our leisure. Anybody else have any more questions on this topic? Okay, so I had one about the local journeys which has been done. The only one more that struck me, Paul, was in the document that you shared as part of the pack on page 28, it mentions about freight travel, and there's a line saying that it further strengthens the need for an effective West Yorkshire-wide freight policy. So I just wondered if there is work going on that.
Yeah, that work will be incorporated into the development of the local transport plan for with the combined authority across West Yorkshire. So that's part of the work that will be ongoing on that. I don't think it's necessarily started in earnest as yet, but that needs to be part of that document as it's policy as it's developed. Again, it's a very challenging point, and yeah, we do need to look at that, because when you look at the emissions, a third of the emissions are from freight, and again, it's a third parties, companies doing that rather than directly the council more often than not, and so our influence is maybe limited in that area. But there's good work being done, hasn't there, in terms of we're demonstrating that the vehicles can work in our fleet, and so others can adopt them. And you do see more and more now EV light vans, at least, on delivery rounds, etc. And again, it's just whether they're doing that for environmental reasons or for cost reasons, as long as they're going in that direction, that's a good thing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So before I close this item, any other comments or questions from any members or officers? No. Okay, well, just to bring it to a close then, thank you for presenting that. It's good to see that so much of it is moving in the right direction. And just a couple of closing comments. You were going to look into the Beryl bike pricing structure. That would be helpful. We've discussed the development of community committee area travel plans. Thank you for the offer from Councillor Thompson. Again, I'm sure we'd all be happy to contribute when they come to our areas. It's also something that we could possibly look at one of our working groups if that would be of interest as well. Think that is it. So with 6 minutes to go, considering we started late and had a few technical problems, I don't think we've done too badly. Thank you to everybody for your questions and comments. I think we've had some good discussions on all our items. Thank you to all the officers who support SEAC and who've supported us today, and for all the work that you do. Very much appreciated. And without any more comments from anybody, I will now close the meeting. Oh, date and time of next meeting, 24th, don't know why I'm looking at that, 19th of February 2024. That's why I said 2024.